designed to impress visitors when they first entered Dolmabahce. In addition to the crystal balustrades, the ceiling itself is also built of crystal, so that the light that streams through forms a magnificent display of the 7 colors of the rainbow.
The ceremonial throne room was one of the largest ballrooms in Europe, designed to host state affairs for 2,500 people. The 4.5-ton chandelier was a gift from Britain's Queen Victoria.
Bu saray, Osmanlı Devleti'nin inşa ettiği ikinci büyük saraydır, Topkapı Sarayı'ndan sonra.
This palace was built to show the glamour and the wealth of the Ottomans to foreign diplomats. But the palace came at a great cost. The Ottomans had wars and economic crises, and spending billions of gold lira and tons of gold on the construction of Dolmabahce only made the financial situation worse.
The Ottomans have declared bankruptcy in 1876, and the Ottoman debt burden is crushing, and in fact, more Europeans work for the Ottoman debt administration in the empire than do Ottoman officials work for the Ottoman Ministry of Finance.
The reign of Sultan Abdul Hamid II would lead the Ottoman Empire into the 20th century. He continued to try to rebuild the reputation of the crumbling empire. He commissioned the most prominent photographers of the day to document the best of the empire: schools, hospitals, and manufacturing. The Sultan personally presented over 1,000 photographs to the U.S. Library of Congress and the British Museum, hoping to convince the Western world of the Ottoman Empire's technological development and industrial advances. These pictures do not, however, tell the true story. As World War I approached, the Ottomans faced bankruptcy and economic disaster. As the 20th century began, the Ottoman Empire was falling apart, stumbling from economic to political crisis.
It was quite difficult and problematic for Ottomans because we see the emergence of nationalism and nationalistic ideologies during this period, especially in the Balkans first. Many of these peoples wanted to develop their own separate nationalistic identities.
And some were successful in gaining independence from the Ottoman Empire. But this was not the case for the Christian Armenian minority, who had lived in the region for 3,000 years. By early in the First World War, 1915, at a time when the Ottoman Empire was shrinking and besieged from all sides, the ultra-nationalist group in power, known as the Young Turks, was trying to restore the glory of their declining empire by uniting all Turkish-speaking peoples in the empire and beyond. The Armenians came under siege when, in the spring of 1915, the Young Turks ordered a forced deportation of 1.75 million ethnic Armenians out of Anatolia to Syria and Mesopotamia. The story of why and what happened is, nearly a century later, controversial, emotional, and hotly debated. To the Turks, the deportations were ordered because some Armenians were allying themselves with Russia, Turkey's enemy to the east. To the Armenians, this was a pretext. The deportations were ordered out of a desire to rid Turkey of Armenians forever. During the evacuation, a forced march of hundreds of miles, hundreds of thousands of men, women, and children died of starvation and massacre. Newspaper reports of the time tell of horrific scenes of rape and murder. Henry Morgenthau, the American ambassador to Turkey, later wrote, "I am confident that the whole history of the human race contains no such horrible episode as this." Estimates of total Armenian deaths in the period of the evacuations range from 300,000 to 1.5 million. The Turks acknowledge that hundreds of thousands of Armenians died, but they and some historians maintain that these deaths were the result of war-caused starvation, civil unrest, and ethnic conflict. To Armenians and many historians, the actions were a clear act of genocide committed by the Ottomans, and today have been recognized as such by many countries. As the Ottoman Empire continued to fail, a power vacuum developed that the British and the French were only too happy to exploit. Both nations were establishing their own spheres of influence in the region, competing with each other and challenging the Ottoman Empire for control of the Middle East. From these troubled times, a new leader emerged, as brave and passionate about these Ottoman lands as the great sultans. His name, Mustafa Kemal.
Osmanlı Devleti,
Since its first days, the Ottoman Empire has trained many great leaders. Without a doubt, Mustafa Kemal was the last and the most famous among all these leaders.
hiç şüphesiz Mustafa Kemal'dir.
During World War I, the Ottomans sided with Germany against the forces of Great Britain, France, and Russia. At the famous Battle of Gallipoli, Mustafa Kemal earned his reputation as commander in the best Ottoman tradition. On February 5, 1915, British warships sailed towards the Dardanelles with the objective of capturing Istanbul. Ottoman troops dug into deep trenches and defended their position against thousands of Australian, British, and New Zealand forces.
Kemal figured out where the British might make their landing, and when they came, a group of Turkish soldiers were running away from the front, and he appeared on the scene and he asked them, "Where are you going?" And they said, "The enemy is coming." And he said, "Right down over that ridge." And he said, "Well, stop running away. Fix your bayonets, lie down, and we'll hold them off right here." And they did that and were successful in holding them off.
During the battle, a piece of shrapnel hit Kemal in the chest. Miraculously, his pocket watch took the force of the blow and his life was spared.
This was very important because it convinced Mustafa Kemal of his immortality. He didn't die when he should have, and so in addition to all his other virtues and his other capacities, he also now had the sense of immortality.
Kemal's determination and defiance motivated all around him. His men attacked and defeated the enemy. 9 months of gruesome battle at Gallipoli left an estimated 46,000 Allied and 66,000 Ottoman soldiers dead. There were over 200,000 injuries. Incredibly, the Turks had defeated their enemies. Mustafa Kemal's division had courageously and successfully defended the Ottoman lands. However, in 1918, the end of World War I meant defeat for the Germans and their Ottoman allies.
The fact that the Ottomans sided with Germany in World War I is huge. It's with us even till today, because they chose the losing side of the war.
There was no way the Ottoman Empire was going to be allowed to survive.
After the war, in the Treaty of Sèvres, the victors divided up the empire, giving portions of the Ottoman homeland of Anatolia to Greece, France, and Italy.
This is the creation of the modern Middle East. I mean, this is what allowed the French and the British to go in and to start territorial acquisition.
It was this treaty, signed by Sultan Mehmet VI, that energized the Turkish nationalist movement. The leader of this post-World War I movement was Mustafa Kemal, who emerged from the war as the only undefeated Turkish commander.
Mustafa Kemal became a national hero. The Turkish people found themselves a new father in the presence of Mustafa Kemal, and he became the leading personality of the time.
He set up a provisional government in Ankara. Over the next 4 years, Kemal's nationalist forces recaptured all of the occupied parts of Anatolia, what is now Turkey.
He will always be remembered and venerated because there may not have been a Turkey if he hadn't led his troops, he and his fellow commanders, to secure some territory for the population.
Parliament offered Kemal the Sultanate and the Caliphate, but he had other ideas. Long a critic of the corrupt rule of the sultans, Kemal shocked Parliament by abolishing both sacred titles. He threatened his colleagues that if the proposition was not carried, some heads would be cut off. Fights broke out. Some politicians fired guns on each other, but Kemal won.
Mustafa Kemal abolished the Ottoman Sultanate and exiled the last of the Ottoman sultans, and that officially was the end of the dynasty.
After more than 600 years, the Sultanate of the Ottoman Empire was over. The last Sultan, Sultan Mehmet VI, left Turkey aboard a British warship.
The end of the Ottoman Sultanate was a major event in Middle Eastern history. It is an event that the area is still wrestling with. There are hundreds of thousands of people still living in those areas that were born in the Ottoman Empire.
On October 19th, 1923, the Republic of Turkey became an independent country, with Mustafa Kemal as its first president. The task ahead was daunting. Turkey was on its knees, facing illiteracy, frightening poverty, inadequate health services, and a severe lack of skilled labor. Kemal separated church from state. Religious garb was banned. Ottoman clothing, and in particular the fez, was forbidden throughout Turkey.
Changing headgear, which may seem very unimportant, looking back on it now, but we have to remember it was a marker of status, a marker of your place in society, and by changing from the fez to the hat, he stated that Turks were now modern.
He granted equal rights to women, including the right to vote, years ahead of many Western democracies. As part of his effort to westernize the country, Kemal introduced a new alphabet. Complex Ottoman Arabic was replaced by the Latin alphabet of Western languages.
It's as if, for example, someone from the government coming to one of our universities in the United States and telling them from now on, Chinese will be your alphabet. You will use Chinese to write your own name. The same kind of thing happened in Turkey. Suddenly, literacy level in Turkey was 0 in one night because of that.
But Kemal's bold decision paid off. In just 1 year, 1928, literacy increased over 500%. Kemal instructed all Turks to adopt traditional Western-style last names. His was chosen for him.
The Grand National Assembly gives him the name Ataturk, meaning Father Turk.
Mustafa Kemal had a very strong personality. More importantly, perhaps, Mustafa Kemal knew what he wanted. Mustafa Kemal is responsible for making Turkey what it is today.
Mustafa Kemal Ataturk is, I believe, one of the major figures of the 20th century. And on a global scale, I think could be ranked in the top dozen or 20 figures.
On November 10th, 1938, Mustafa Kemal died at the age of 57 at the Dolmabahce Palace. The clock in his bedroom remains frozen at 9:05 a.m., the time of his death. And to this day, at the same hour on the day of his death, people all over the country stop for a moment to remember Mustafa Kemal Ataturk. Modern Turkey, sitting at the crossroads of Europe and Asia, continues to embrace both East and West, the old and the new. Its exotic blend of cultures, past and present, is most visible in Istanbul.
Even today, with all of the skyscrapers that have appeared in other sections of Istanbul, the old section of the city is still dominated by these wonderful Ottoman imperial mosques and by the Topkapı Palace complex as well.
The influence of the Ottoman Empire is felt not just in Turkey, but in the Middle East, the Balkans, North Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula.
Osmanlı Devleti tarihin gördüğü en büyük 3. imparatorluktur.
The Ottoman Empire maintained power for nearly 600 years in 3 continents. During these 600 years, they constructed unique architectural monuments, created millions of artistic works, and raised numerous scientists and high-quality statesmen.
In the end, the Ottoman Empire remains an empire of contradictions. It was assembled by the might of its war machine, yet remembered for its development of fair and just laws. It conquered people of many faiths,